Hi, Dominic. Welcome to Stockbridge Community Cinema. And we're very sorry that you can't be here in person, but I'm hoping that this is going to be the next best thing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul. I'm really sorry I can't be there. We've had a domestic COVID outbreak, and I'm just trying to isolate myself along with my partner just to make sure that I'm not spreading it. I'm negative at the moment, but you just never know. Yeah.
Story of life at the moment, isn't it? Let's get on with the questions. First of all, when did you first find out about this story? I mean, were you aware of Greville Wynn before?
I had no knowledge of Greville Wynn before I read the script. And in fact, when I was sent the script by my agents in America. And you know what, I can't even remember when it was, 2016? No, 2017, I think. I just finished making On Cheddar Beach, and they were looking for another project for me. And they have a lot of writers on their books, at least they did at that time. They sent a bunch of scripts, and this one really stood out. And when I started reading it, it didn't say anything on the front cover about it being a real story. So it took me quite a long time to realize that it probably wasn't. It wasn't until the end that I then looked it up and discovered that it was. And then I started a process of sort of researching and finding out about the real person or the real people. Yeah.
You're probably too young to remember the actual case, because I think it's about 1960, wasn't it? I was only about 10 at the time, and I remember my father saying worried about the Cold War and the fact it might break out into World War III. So it was a real big deal at the time. Although I probably didn't appreciate it. But so this story is definitely one worth telling, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly was. I remember my mother saying that, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the terror being absolutely real, that we were heading towards a nuclear war. And of course, it was only, 17 years since Hiroshima. So there was a sense that we knew that people could drop nuclear weapons on people, or atomic bombs as they were at that time. And I suppose, it was very, very concrete. But no, I didn't know anything about him. And I think, but then when I started speaking to people of my parents' generation, a lot of them did, because it was a big news story at the time, especially his release from prison. That was a big moment.
So you were sent the script, and presumably that was a sort of story already written there for you. But to what extent did you have to change it in order to make it sort of fit into a 2-hour film?
Well, it was already a really persuasive script. And the thing that I really liked about it, which I think one of the main reasons it grabbed me, was that it had this sort of plotting and tension of a spy story, of course, which is also enhanced when you know that it really happened. But added to it, there was this sort of more personal, emotional side to the story, which I really liked, partly because Greville was a regular person, and he was plunged into this, very sort of high jeopardy situation. And that allowed, I think, the audience to sort of access that world in a way that I hadn't seen before. And it also looked very much at his sort of the cost, if you like, of that. But the first draft was much more a story of two people. And the balance in the story was more sort of equal with Penkovsky. And I felt, along with my producers, that the film needed to be focused more around Greville, and that would allow a little bit more space to look at his life, his marriage. And I think he was the character that the audience would relate to more closely, because we would go in as the sort of novice into that world. So that was really the focus of the rewriting process. There were other bits and pieces we took out. There was a whole bit with Bobby Kennedy, a plot line with Bobby Kennedy that we took out later on. And one of the things is, because filming is so expensive and time is such a premium, you really don't want to be filming stuff that isn't going to be cut, if you can avoid it. It's not the sort of thing where you go, let's just do it and see whether it works, because it's just, you lose days from doing that, and days add up. So there was stuff taken out at the end to sort of economize the shooting and put things into the same settings, for example, which were in different settings. So there were those sort of practical things that happened towards the end of the process, just before you're about to shoot, to sort of save money and make it work better,
So although you could call this a spy story, it's not in the sort of James Bond or even John le Carré style of film. And I think I read the Spectator film critic called it the best Cold War thriller I've seen that I fully understand. I mean, obviously you're making a drama, really. It happened to be about two people who were a spy and his contact. and not so much a story about the spying.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's fair. I mean, listen, the whole world is fascinating, isn't it? I'd read a book a couple of years before, maybe a year or so before I got this script, which was about Kim Philby, a brilliant book by Ben McIntyre. And it is such a fascinating world because people have to live double lives. And that's interesting. How do you manage the deception that you have? You know, it's fascinating because it's sort of about acting in the end. But I've always found with spy movies, as much as I've enjoyed them and admired them, I've never really had an emotional response to someone in one of those stories. I mean, you care about whether they're going to live or die, and you care about whether they're going to sort of their quest for good, if you like, when they're trying to get information out. You care about that, but you don't have that sort of sense of vulnerability of a human being that you might have in a drama. And that I thought was exciting in this. And I think the film is as much a story about friendship and loyalty as it is about the spy craft, the Cold War, and the other sort of background elements of the story.
How much of it is factually correct? I mean, did you have to make up bits or guess that what might have happened? Or
oh yeah, there's a lot of compression, and that's the real issue with making a film rather than a TV series. I mean, there is a brilliant TV series to be made out of this. In fact, the BBC did, I think, a 3-parter back in the 90s or 80s, 90s. But I think there's a longer series because there's so much extra stuff. There was a woman called Janet Chisholm who was working with Penkovsky. She was a British woman who was married to a diplomat based in Moscow, and she played a really important role in the story. Other sort of side shoots of the story that are really extraordinary. I mean, Penkovsky's background and so on. But you've got to compress, and you've got to sort of combine things, combine characters sometimes, combine events. But we tried to stay true to the essence of what happened. We stayed true to the events, the main events in the story, and we sort of closed the gaps. Because how do you turn 3 years into 2 hours of film? That's challenging, but you try and do it in a way that has integrity, so you're not lying about what happened, but you're sort of compressing the truth down into sort of more sort of essential blocks, if you like, a story.
Yes, interesting that you're casting. You have an American, an English man, and I think he's Georgian, isn't he? The man who plays Colonel. So there's a sense of authenticity in your casting of the film.
Yeah.
How did Benedict Cumberbatch get to be involved in the film?
Well, I'd worked with him twice before. Twice as a director and once as a producer. We did 2 bits of theatre, and then I produced one, directed one, and then we did The Hollow Crown. We played Richard III. So he's sort of a friend, but he's also someone that I really wanted to work with again, because he's such a rewarding direct actor for a director to work with, because he's so inventive. And because I first worked with him in 2007, and to see how he's grown in those years has been amazing, in confidence, but also his craft. So I was just keen to find another project for him. And when I read the script, I mean, immediately I thought of him. He's just so obviously right for it. As it turned out, he was exactly the same age as Greta Wynn was when he played the part. But that ability to be very contained, but also to have deep feeling underneath. And I knew that the sequences in the prison, that he would really go there, because he loves extremes. So there were lots of things about it. I thought, this is great. So I just got in touch with him. I think I sent him a text and said, I've got a really good script. You want to have a look? And then I went over to see him, and he was interested in it. But there was a lot going on at that point. He had a hell of a lot. So, but then by chance, lots of those things fell away, and suddenly we were on. And it happened quite quickly, which was great, because once you have, the way it works is this: if you have a script and a director, then if you can get an actor that people will put money into, because essentially what's happening is they're taking a gamble, the financiers, on whether they'll make their money back. And if they know that they've got a marketable star or several stars in a movie, then they can finance it. And that's how it worked with this. He came on board, and then the money followed.
I hear he had to undergo quite a big weight reduction for the later scenes in the film. How did that sort of interfere with your filming schedule or his other commitments?
Well, we stopped filming for 3 months. So we finished it in December 2018. We picked up again in March 2019. He and Merab, who plays Penkovsky, did a lot of work. Benedict worked with the nutritionist, and he had proper support, because if you're losing a lot of weight in a short period, you need proper supervision because you can really harm yourself. But actually, he's also padded out in the rest of the film because he was a vegan at the time. He was really quite skinny already, so he padded his cheeks and he's got padding so on his under his clothes, so that it would look more dramatic at the end, the difference. But no, what happened was that when I started researching it and I saw the pictures of Greville Wynn when he came out of prison. I mean, Greville Wynn was quite short and slightly sort of chunky, but when he came out of prison, he was absolutely skeletal. And I thought that really does tell a story of what he's been through. And so I sort of gently put it to him. And then eventually we sort of looked at his schedule and he was totally up for it. My producer supported me in sort of stopping shooting and coming back. So it was a logistical, challenge, but it worked very well. It's quite interesting coming back to a film to do the ending when you know what the rest of the film is. Because we'd edited it all together by that point, except for the last bit. So you can then sort of go, oh, right, I know what we need now. And actually Benedict watched it and he said, oh, I can see what I need to do in the last scene now, which was useful. It's a sort of luxury, actually, in some ways,
Did your budget, time or money, allow you to sort of experiment when you were shooting the film? Did you tend to know how you were going to shoot a scene and then just do it, or did you sort of think, well, let's try it this way?
It's a good question. The pressure of time is the hardest thing, in my view, to manage in directing films. Because if you can imagine the number of people you need on a set, when you're going to a location, it's like a military operation. You have sort of encampment of trailers, sort of a mile away from where you're filming, and a huge number of people. So if you think about that in financial terms, it's a massive commitment and you cannot afford to waste time. That said, on this film, having had a bit more experience, the budget was a bit more than my last film and I had a bit more nous about how to make the time work better. So I didn't feel the sort of horrible time pressure that I felt on Chesil Beach, which it was so hard because I never felt, there were lots of bits of it that I felt could have been better because we didn't have enough time. So we had enough time, but you don't have quite enough to do to really just throw things up in the air. You just don't have that time. And we missed a few things. We had some lovely location stuff for London, for when the Russians come to London, the streets and so on, which we dressed really brilliantly for the early 60s, and we couldn't really use them. We just ran out of time. So I had enough time to try things out, but not really sort of experiments. No, not in the way I would have liked. Yeah.
I was going to ask you where the film was made. Some of it appears to be made in Russia itself, but I doubt that was the case, was it?
No, it was all a bit sort of crazy that. So we did the first half of the shoot was in London. And in fact, some of the Russian scenes are set in London. It was not set in London, it was shot in London. We shot most of them in town halls because we wanted the feeling of that sort of 1930s architecture. So for example, the moment where Penkovsky meets Wynn is in Kingston Town Hall, as is the sort of, that sort of bunker where they're searching out the paperwork. That's Kingston Town Hall. So we tried to find that very sort of 30s Stalinist look to a lot of the architecture. And there was a brilliant building in Haringey, which has now been turned into flats, it's a wonderful sort of deco town hall building, which we shot a lot in. And then we went to Prague. And Prague was great because it's got a real infrastructure for film. They make a lot of films there. And at that time, we were still in the EU sort of officially, which kept all the costs down. We had gone to Kiev, to lots of different places, but we settled on Prague. And we were going to go to Belarus for 2 days to shoot the exteriors because they've got Minsk was completely razed during the war, and basically they built, it was in the USSR, and they built this sort of Stalinist city, and it's still got the sort of 70-foot Lenin statues. I mean, it really feels like a Stalinist sort of scare. Well, it is. And so we were going to go there for a couple of days, but about 2 weeks before we were going to go and shoot, we pulled the plug on it because we weren't getting a level of sort of commitment from them that made us feel safe about going. So then we suddenly had to throw it all together in no time. So Russia, most of the exteriors of Russia, like the river and everything, is all green screen. It's all done on computers. It's amazing what can be done. I mean, most of that came off the internet. It's extraordinary. The technology now is brilliant. And I'm actually quite pleased with how it looks because you get the scale. I've been to Moscow a lot, and it's a city of extraordinary scale. and we got some of that. So yeah, it was a complicated process, that. Yeah.
And to what extent is do you leave the decisions on the cinematography to the director of photography? Was it Sean Bobbitt, I think was the DP? Is it sort of a product of the discussion, collaboration between the two, or do you tend to leave it?
Very close collaboration. He's brilliant. He's quite brilliant, very experienced. What we did was we did a lot of work before we started filming. So we worked out all our shots, and then we had an attitude of, if something better comes up on the day, we won't do that. Or sometimes you run out of time and you have to distill. But we had a sort of philosophy, and I think with any creative collaboration, you need to define what your sort of rules are before you start, or as you start. The first thing is working out what the rules are and what the guiding principles are. Because once you've done that, you have a sort of way of making decisions, which makes the process much more straightforward, and it allows you to be thinking in the same way. So that's essentially what we did. And, some things need to be planned a lot, like you're doing a crane shot or whatever. You need to obviously have the equipment, and that's expensive and needs a lot of planning. But there were quite a few things that we went, actually, I've had a better idea. Why don't we try this on the day? And in fact, some of the best shots, I think. There's one shot in the restaurant where Wynne decides he's going to do it. Or, no, he starts to realize what's happening, and the camera moves around him, which looks simple, but it really was not. And that's something we came up with on the day, and I think it's a really effective way of sort of bringing the audience into the story.
Now, I believe the first time this film was shown was at the Sundance Film Festival in 2020 in January. It was at that time it was called Ironbark. How did the name get changed to the Courier? Because I believe there's a film made in 2019 called The Courier. Right, confusing, but
yeah. Well, weirdly, it's also distributed by the same company. Yeah, they didn't. They were the ones that wanted us to change it. Excuse me, I'm just going to blow my nose. It was called Ironbark because the code name of Penkovsky was Ironbark, but I noticed that people couldn't remember the name. They sort of go, "What's that film you did?" Yeah, they couldn't remember that the name wasn't sticking, and the other thing was that it's a name that's associated with Penkovsky and not with Wynne, and Wynne is the main character. But I liked the name in itself. I thought it was quite good. And then once the distributors came on board, the American distributors came on board, they said, we're really concerned about the name. We've done some market research, and here is what we propose. And I was getting ready to fight. I sort of, do that physical thing of my rearing up sort of thing. But actually, when they said the Courier, I thought, oh, no, that's a really good idea. I tell you why. I think because it's about Wynne, and it's a sort of simple net title, but it's about someone who's just carrying information, and that's the point about Wynne, is that he was in some ways just a courier, but he's someone who then had to make some serious moral choices and go way beyond what he thought. And the interesting thing about it was, although it's a more generic title, they did market research, and the market research was extraordinary, because something like 10% of people liked Ironbark, and the market research was on, would you go and see this film? And they showed them an image and they gave them the title. And about 10% said they'd go and see Ironbark, and 90% said they'd go and see The Courier. But then we did a preview so later on, after we changed the title, we then went to Zurich Film Festival and showed it there, where everyone speaks English. I mean, they did have subtitles, but everyone speaks English. And I noticed that the audience were getting the film earlier than they were, i.e. they were sort of understanding the arc of the film earlier. And I think it's because of the title. I think the title basically said, it's about this guy. It sort of pointed them in the right direction. So yeah, it's really helped. And the sales have been really, really good, which is lovely. I mean, it's done very, very well. For a small independent film in the middle of a pandemic, it's done extremely well. And I think the title in the English-speaking world has definitely helped it. So I think it was the right call. It's probably more boring, but yeah, I think it was the right call.
I was going to ask you how well it had done, because obviously you made the film, I think you finished it in 2019, and it was only released in this country in August this year. It must have been very frustrating for you, and well, along with all the rest of us, I suppose. But do you think it did not as well as it could have done had it not been released straight away?
The American distributors, who've been great, actually. Sorry, not the distributors, the American financiers who, been really closely involved. I mean, they were one of the key producers. So we sort of worked very closely together. The guy that runs that, Glenn Basner, who's a very experienced film producer and financier, said that the basic thing is this year, all of the sales are 50%, right across the board, just in terms of, worldwide, in terms of the cinemas being open and so on. And with that in mind, we've done really, really well for a movie of our scale. Who knows how we'd have done? Because everything's so different, isn't it? Everything's so different. It's not just that a lot of people aren't going out as much to cinema, but it's also there's been less other stuff on. But the word of mouth has been really good on the movie. And one of the things that I've been really pleased about, and I wasn't expecting this at all, is it's gone down really well here. I sort of thought that in the world we're in, it might seem a bit old-fashioned. I mean, it was described online quite a lot as a dad movie. And I don't really, well, I suppose I do know what that means. But I think it did actually, the word of mouth was good. The reviews were better than I expected. And people have, it's got a, although there's a deep sadness at the end of the movie, it is quite a sort of positive film in a way, because it affirms ideas of loyalty, commitment. It affirms the idea of sort of making sacrifices for other people. And those sort of values, I think people really want to connect with, things that bring us together. It seems to me are the things that we all need at the moment and are looking for. So maybe it's spoken to that. But no, I'm very pleased with, in the end, with how it all played out and how it's going down.
Well, it's done very well in Stockbridge. I can tell you that we sold out within 2 days of the tickets going on sale.
It's great.
Which is a record for us. So well done to you for that.
Thrilled. Well, I wish I could be there, as I say, but I'm thrilled about that. Yeah.
This is your second feature film that you've made after On Chesil Beach, which we showed, I think, 3 years ago. Your background has mainly been in the theatre. I think you've done about 30 years experience in the theatre. So to what extent do you see your future being more in the cinema, making films, rather than dealing with theatre?
Well, it's sort of in the lap of the gods, really. I mean, you sort of do the projects that interest you. I mean, absolutely loved making films, and it's been great. I started around the age of 50, and to sort of have to think again. I mean, there are lots of things that are similar about the two things, obviously, but then there are huge areas that are very different. And I've loved having to go, okay, I'm starting again now, because it's very easy if you reach a certain level in your profession to just sort of stay still and be comfortable. But I've really loved the challenge of learning new things. And I want to learn more, and I'm excited about making more. And I absolutely love, it's challenging making films because of the politics of power involved in money, but the actual shooting of films is a joyful thing, even when it's terrible and crazy and you're running out of time and it started raining and the light's gone. There's a sort of mad energy and adrenaline to it that I absolutely love. But I've got quite a lot of theatre coming up, so if I can balance both, that's my ideal. Yeah.
Well, my next question was going to be, what are your next projects going to be?
Well, I'm doing a show at the National that I should have done last year, which is a beautiful play from the 1930s called The Corn is Green, which actually was made into a film in the 40s with Bette Davis. It's a really lovely, again, quite positive, uplifting play about a young man from a very poor working class background whose life is transformed by a teacher. So it's all about that, the power that a good teacher can have in changing someone's life and changing their destiny. I love the play. And then there's a bunch of other stuff. I'm supposed to be doing a stage version of the Game of Thrones, but I don't know when that's happening. And I'm supposed to be doing the film of Follies, the musical I did at the National, and we're sort of working on the script of that at the moment. So, and there's another film that's sort of hanging around. So it's all about availability of actors, getting the script right, etc. There's a lot of variables. The only thing I know I'm doing is that play at the National at the moment.
I heard there was a romantic comedy as well on the.
Yes, that's sort of gone away, unfortunately. It's a really brilliant script. It's sort of, for various complicated reasons, it's sort of disappeared. But there are other lovely scripts that are sort of around, and I've got a production company now, and we're developing some TV stuff and some theatre and film, and we might, I hope to direct some of that. So you're sort of going. There's a bit of speculation in the whole thing. I only want to commit to things that I love, but whether they're going to happen or not is another question. It's a question of whether you can get the time, the space, and the money to do it, you know.
Well, I think I've exhausted my list of questions for you, and I'd just like to say thank you very much for agreeing to take part in this. As I said before, I'm sorry that we weren't able to have you here in the cinema with us, but I hope I've asked the questions that our audience would have liked to hear about. And if there's anything else that I haven't covered that they want to know about, I'm sure they'll email me, and I'll pass that on.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much, and we look forward to seeing you when your next film comes out. And,
me too.
In Stockbridge.
Thanks a lot. Okay. Nice to talk.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.